Hey everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm here with Sarah Winward, and we're super excited about the chance to share more about the Best of Sarah Winward, which is the newest course we released with Sarah this past week. You've probably seen on Instagram, you may have signed up for the free training we did last week, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to actually learn from Sarah live and also kind of give you a taste of what's in the course. So Sarah, thank you again for joining us.
Hi everybody. Thanks.
And it's really neat to see. I mean, we're getting so many different people from DC, hi from blizzarding Manhattan. I mean, all over the world. It's really cool. Southwest England, Mexico, Ontario. So thank you everyone who's probably either staying up late or got here really, really early to take part in the webinar. We're really honored that you're here. I'm gonna go through a couple of things about the webinar. Sometimes because we're live, we run into technical difficulties. So if one of us drops off, no worries. Typically, we're just gonna be back on in the next couple of minutes. For some reason, if you're kicked off the webinar, just use the same link that you were given to log back on. If you have to leave for whatever reason in the middle, whether you got to go pick up your kids or you have a meeting with a client, no worries. Everyone who signed up for the webinar will receive a replay link afterwards that allows you to watch the webinar on your own time. One of the things that we always get a question about is this the video that you receive in the course? And all the videos that are included in the course were pre-recorded in San Francisco. So this is a live stream, which means depending on your internet connection, you may or may not be able to see as much detail, or it may freeze or pause. But if you give it a couple seconds, usually you come back on. So we're going to start a little bit. Sarah's going to share some case studies with us. She's going to talk through a installation that she did for Kinfolk, or Our actually. I think it may be a little feedback. And then we're going to go into, she's going to share some of her favorite tools. As you can see on the table, got some neat tools. She's going to kind of tell us a little bit about what's in her installation toolkit. And then Sarah's going to design a spring arrangement for us live. And then at the very end, you'll get a chance to ask any questions that you have. You guys will probably see in the chat section to the right. Feel free to ask questions during the entire webinar. We're going to try to get to as many as we can during the webinar and also at the very end during the Q&A session. So yeah, Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and get the presentation up with the different photos. So you can go ahead and start sharing about the case studies. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So as many of you probably know, we released a course last year with Sarah Winward called The Nature of Wedding Floral Design. And it was such a wonderful experience, and we got so many rave reviews from students who purchased the course that we wanted to do another course with Sarah this year. So we did a big survey back in the fall about what were more things you wanted to learn from Sarah. And the two big things we heard were installations. How does she come up with all these amazing installations that we see on Instagram and Pinterest floating around, as well as, working in the seasons, but also like her color palettes. How does she come up with all these amazing color palettes? And that's where the Best of Sarah Winward came from. It's both courses, the installation and the seasonal floral design course. And during this class, we're going to kind of give you a peek inside both courses. So what you'll learn, we're going to talk about her most challenging installations, the one that she did for Our. You're going to get a peek inside her installation toolbox. We're also going to talk about retail and wholesale pricing examples for different designs. And this is one of the things that is new about Sarah's course that we're really excited about. She actually there are 40 plus case studies in the combo course where she goes into detail about not only sourcing and staffing and mechanics and construction of the actual design, but she also breaks down the recipe, the materials used, the retail price of everything, and the wholesale price. So we're going to show you some examples of an installation and a centerpiece and what that looks like in the course. And then we're going to move into probably the highlight of the event, where Sarah's going to arrange a spring arrangement for us. And then we're going to try to answer as many questions at the end. So Sarah, I'm pulling up the photo of kind of the finished piece that you did for Our. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about it? Because I know you put this up on Instagram earlier this week and people went crazy for it.
This was a fun project. You see it up there?
Yeah, you know what? I think I may have forgotten to share my screen. Sorry, guys. Let me do that real quick. No wonder you can't see it. All right, hold on. There we go. Sorry. Let's see. There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
Can y'all see it?
I can.
Yeah, awesome.
This was a commercial job, which I don't do too many of, so it was a learning experience for me. This was with the company Hour, and there was also like a styling director and a home production company involved. So this was for a campaign for actually like a luxury apartment complex. And the client wanted us to make some sort of surreal floating cloud garden something. When I was hired on for the project, it was actually fairly far into it. So they had already decided that they wanted a hydrangea cloud. So my job was basically just execute large surreal hydrangea cloud. So this job happened in Sweden, and we'll go through it in like so much detail in the course. There's so many pages for you to read, but this is one of those situations where you move from plan A to plan B, plan C, like everything that we had planned and actually would have worked kind of got thrown out the window last minute for reasons that were out of our control. So we had to just constantly choose something new, choose a new way to hang the structure. And that's something that's very real. It happens all the time in events all over the place. So this was one of those situations for me. And it was harder because it was something that was huge. I mean, this, you can't see scale here, but I'm trying to think how many feet it was, probably 20 feet across. But if Emily scrolls down, you can see me in progress. So what we ended up doing after, well, our location was changed the day before the shoot. So we couldn't hang from this whole grid ceiling that they had at our first location. We got permission from the second location to hang from their ceiling. They had these big concrete beams there right above the ceiling. But then when they saw the amount of flowers that we were hanging, they said, never mind, we don't feel good about it. So we actually had to last minute bring in a whole rigging crew to rig up. It was like a grid stand. I don't even know the proper word, but it was on these big metal stands that stretched to the sides of the room and gave us a big square that went around the edges of the room. And then from that, we had to suspend something in the middle. So we ended up buying some fencing panels, and they were actually just like gates from the hardware store because that's what we were able to get the night before. And we suspended them horizontally in the center of the big hanging structure. And then we put everything on top of that. And, you know, it wasn't perfect and there were things we had to keep working through, but that's kind of how it goes sometimes. And we were able to power through. But it was so fun with that installation to see scale. I think scale is one of the things I teach all the time with installations. Your scale has to be appropriate. If we had made that hydrangea cloud this big, once they had the model standing underneath it, which was the shot they wanted, it wouldn't have been surreal. You know, we wanted this to feel otherworldly. So this was about making it larger than life, making it, you know, so much bigger than the model was going to be standing underneath it. And I go through in the course my kind of theories about scale, proportion, and impact, so you can see what goes into that for me. And I also, in that installation, break down exactly what went into it, how it ends.
Well, I was going to pull up the example for them to see, Sarah, and so you can kind of talk through, because this was one of the things, the feedback that we got on your last course is people really wanted that more granular, kind of like detailed information about, you know, what goes into an actual installation, not only the mechanics and the construction side, but about like pricing, retail and wholesale as well as like staffing and things like that. Let me pull it up. But yeah, so this is a page from the actual course. So you guys can see Sarah goes into so much detail about staffing, as well as the retail price, any troubleshooting that she encountered, as well as the recipe. So the quantity used, what the cost was, all of the supplies. Yeah, I mean, are there any, so it sounds like, Sarah, your favorite thing from this specific installation was just the size of it, like walking into the room and like just the feeling you got when you saw just the massive.
Yeah, it was so surreal. And I think that's something that's maybe a common thread between my installations. And to me, if you're making something big, I mean, it's a sculpture. You want it to kind of like evoke feelings in you. You want to make it an experience for somebody. So I think that's something that I try and make with all my installations. It makes you feel something. It's not just like, wow, that's a lot of flowers. In addition to that, it kind of has an emotion to it, or like a life of its own. And this was one of those that I think really came through that way.
Yeah, so speaking, I mean, you guys will see here chicken wire, fencing panels, cable ties. These are some of the supplies that Sarah uses a lot on her installations. And she's actually going to share with us right now some example or some actual tools that she uses. She pulled them for us, which is
Yeah.
see. Yeah, awesome.
This is an obvious one, but as you probably know, I did not work for any florist before I started any event florist before I started doing this on my own. So I was just kind of figuring things out, but I didn't know about cable ties for about the first 2.5 years of my business. So I was wiring everything. So just in case none of you know about cable ties, these are your best friend. I use these, I mean, for everything. I've used them to tie a bouquet closed if I didn't have tape. I've used them to like tie my van door closed. Stuff. So they're just plastic ties that you loop through and then they lock. So I use these to like, for all this hydrangea on that installation, they were cable tied to the grid. This is also a bigger size. These are really thick. I mean, these can go around a tree if you need to strap something to a tree. And there are some that you can get that are like 5 feet long. These are expensive, so I suggest buying them in bulk if you can from like an electrician supply place or something like that, but they're one of my favorites.
And that's what's so great about our courses. I feel like we really try to come at it from an angle of what do we wish we knew back then when we started to save us all this time and money. And like Sarah said, she spent 2.5 years using wire instead of cable ties. And so like all those like meaty bits that Sarah shares. And then there's some other stuff as well. I see like wiring and things like that.
And one of the things too that I love about the course is I make 4 installation examples for you on video, and then the case studies. There are so many options ranging from like, this is something that I just rigged up with a branch that I had on hand at home to I had this giant custom thing built by a production company. You know, there's something in there for everyone. It was like the full range of my career and like how I started with just birch pole hippas and have moved into maybe having more things custom made for me. And you can see how I do all of those.
Cool.
So one of the things, like when I am rigging my own stuff, which is most of the time, to be honest with you, I use airline cable. And I know you saw a bit about this in the 3-day training the other day, but airline cable is just a coated wire cable. Electricians use it, lighting guys use it, anyone rigging heavy sound equipment will use it. You can buy it at hardware stores, or this is another one of those things you might want to buy from like an industrial or electric supply company so you can get it cheaper. It usually comes on a big roll like this. There's several different gauges, and this is basically used as your structure. I mean, this hangs your grid panel, or if you want to do something really light but fishing line isn't strong enough, this is what you can use. I have several different clasp systems that I like to use. You can just buy them at any hardware store. You'll see several in the course. This one is like a little crimp kit. So it's just like when you make a necklace and you have a crimp bead, you thread it on and then with pliers squish it closed, so then you have this looped end here. I oftentimes like to use these hooks, and then I'll crimp it onto the hook so that whenever I'm up a ladder, I can just latch this on to whatever I'm hooking it onto, instead of having to stand up there and like be twisting this clasp set or crimping the beads. So that's already done on this, and then it makes that time up on the ladder so much quicker.
Yeah. And it's hard to see on the video, guys, just because we're doing this from our laptops. But in Sarah's course, one of the great things about the videos is that we're getting it from a lot of different angles. So you're seeing that detail. You're getting the up-close shot of Sarah as her hands are working, seeing how she's rigging, seeing how she's tying and doing the construction for the installations.
Another thing I have in my toolkit is a shovel. Like This is actually a travel shovel, so it breaks down. Like it goes in a little bag, and I carry this with me. It's like called survival shovel or something like that. Options like this. This is amazing for, foraging if you're digging up like a spiky plant in the desert, or if you need to like dig a rock out of the ground where you're mounting an arbor or something. Like it's metal, sometimes you end up using it as a hammer. This one actually has like a blade inside of it too. It unscrews and has like a little saw blade inside there.
Awesome.
Awesome that it's called a survival tool, because it really is sometimes when you're on site working. So this is something that I love. Any shovel will do, but this one actually has come in handy many times, and I love that I can travel with it because it just like breaks down. This is not an endorsement for this shovel, but I might want to go buy one. So that's one of my other favorite things to have. In the installations course, we show you a lot of different things, a lot of like chicken wire, grid panel, water tubes, birch poles, some things in foam. This is a foam pod that I reference a couple times and use in like aisle arrangements a lot, or small arrangements you might mount to a wall. These are amazing. I try not to use foam too much, but when I do, it's usually in an installation. These are like my go-to for aisle arrangements in a church. Like I'll make something beautiful hanging out of this and then just strap it right onto the church pew. I know these are harder to find outside of the United States, but this is Oasis brand. And so if you're out of the United States, I know you can order it online or something. I've tried to find them in a few other countries and it's been hard, but they are Oasis brand, so it's easy to find. They've got all these openings around the edges, so you can like wire or cable tie through it, and they're great.
Awesome.
Tools.
Okay, so we're gonna move into Sarah sharing a centerpiece kind of arrangement case study to my screen here so you guys can see. Okay, Sarah, so I know that this was a shoot that you did. Riley Hitchner was the photographer. Can you kind of tell us about this arrangement? And I know you mentioned too that this was a very like budget-friendly arrangement as well.
Yes. This is one of the examples in the course, but you should also know that a lot of the arrangements in the seasonal course were made just for this course. So they're brand new, you've never seen them before, and I didn't want to spoil it here. But this is one of my old favorites, and I think it's something that kind of encompasses a lot of like my work. It's viney and kind of overflowing, which I love. And a lot of people ask, like, how do you get those vines to stay alive in a lot of my work? Because I do use a lot of plants. And this is how. So this arrangement was made just in a big wooden dough bowl. And I put one brick of foam in the middle, and then around the edges are actually all plants that I just took out of their plastic container, dirt and all, and shoved right into the bowl. So I'm not cutting them. I wasn't doing anything that would really compromise them. They were just shoved right into the bowl, and then they don't mind a little extra water that I poured over it, and that way they stay happy. So in this arrangement, I have a handful of foraged lilac, a few cuttings of some black elderberry. I think the bleeding heart was for my garden, some pansies. Then I believe it's licorice vine, some Japanese fern, and in a minute Emily will show you what's going into it. But what I did was just take them out of their container, put them right into my centerpiece, and then I arranged the fresh flowers around that. I love the way vines, like natural vines, grow out of a pot. When you have like some vining plant growing on your porch or something somewhere, it gets this really aesthetically pleasing, like draping over itself look, which I think is hard to recreate better than nature does. So sometimes I don't. I just put these plants that already look so beautiful in an arrangement and let them do that for me. When you see the breakdown of this, you'll see that it was actually very inexpensive to make, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should only charge a little bit for it. I go through in the course about charging for impact. which I think is especially important in installations sometimes. You know, maybe you only spent $50 making something, but that doesn't mean you should charge that little for it. If something makes a big impact, you should be able to charge for that impact. And people kind of expect that. That's, you know, if you only charged $100 for the centerpiece, say, and then how are they going to feel justified spending $400 on a bouquet that's smaller? than, so that's kind of something I go through in the course. And this is one of those examples of something that was pretty inexpensive to create, but filled a whole table and was beautiful. And I think you could charge impact for it.
Yeah, and I feel like this is definitely one of my favorite parts about the course as well, is because I don't know of any other floral course online or resource online that does a breakdown like this, that shows you with each arrangement and installation what, not only what the recipe was, as well as the quantity, the wholesale costs, and then what Sarah would charge the client. I feel like all of those little bits of information are just always so hard to figure out, especially at the beginning. But even as you continue to grow as a florist and you're expanding your business and wanting to become either a destination wedding florist or take on less weddings, I feel like this content is just so meaty and wonderful. And if you buy the combo course, you get 50 case studies between the two where Sarah goes into detail like this. Before we jump into Sarah Designing Live, we just wanted to go into a little detail about what each course offers, and then we'll get to designing. So as you guys know, we launched her newest course this past week, and we've been trying to share as much as we can through free videos and on Instagram. But right now we're hosting a special through Thursday at midnight where it's $200 off the retail price. So it's $898. And then if you've purchased a course with If I May before, we're actually giving you an additional $100 off. So you have the opportunity to save up to $300 if you buy both courses. You can also purchase them separately. In the installation design course, Sarah teaches how to build cheppas and hanging installations, floral walls, and arches. There's 200 pages of PDF content. You get 12 case studies with that kind of breakdown that we were talking about earlier. And then 4 hours of video training. And like I mentioned, I mean, the videos are one of my favorite parts as well, because we really are getting those up close angles that you want to know, how does Sarah place that there? Or what does the construction look like? We worked really closely with the videography team to make sure that we were getting it from the perspective that how you would want to see Sarah design. And then you also get an additional 2 videos. We're doing a bonus where it's kind of like a cost-effective doorway arch if you're working with a client that has a lower budget, and then a floral arch. The seasonal course is Sarah goes into teaching how you arrange in spring, summer, fall, and winter. You get 250 pages of PDF content, 2 hours of video training, as well as 40 case studies where Sarah breaks down the pricing, mechanics, construction, things like that. And then you also get a video on making floral crowns. And so now we're going to get into Sarah designing. So I'm going to switch over my screen. And yeah, Sarah, can you kind of share us? You there? Yeah, yeah.
So I'll be making a spring centerpiece today. And at the end, I'll tell you like what I would charge for this. And one thing to note too in the seasons course, it's not just about seasons. I know some of you live in a place where there aren't 4 seasons. That's a huge part of what motivates my work, but that doesn't mean it's not applicable to any of you. I think it's about working with the materials you have. And I think sometimes when I make an arrangement with like blooming cherry branches or something, people will say like, okay, well, what would you use if cherry branches weren't in season? And that's what the seasons course is. It's me saying like, okay, if you want something fluffy in winter, here it is. Or maybe you embrace things that aren't fluffy. And I show you and tell you all of my favorite shapes or branches or color palettes that I kind of go to for each of those. But in the end, it's about working with the material that is in season and inspires you. And that's, there's something there for everyone. So spring is my favorite season. You can't see too many of the flowers here right now, but I did do a little video on my Instagram stories if you want to look up closer at them, and then we'll show you at the end. But there are so many delicate flowers available in the spring. Like I love all the really intricate shapes that they have. There's a lot of bell-shaped flowers, which are some of my favorites, or things with a lot of petals. I've got some really amazing ranunculus here. So spring is kind of my muse. I'm also a Taurus. I'm a spring baby, so I think maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, so I'm working in this bowl, which I've already put a frog into. I just put the frog into it with the floral tack. You'll see me do this in the course too, but it's just like the floral tack that you get in any supply store. I put it in there about an hour ago so that it can cure before I put the water in. And I'm also going to use chicken wire inside. I like using a frog and chicken wire, especially when I'm working in a bowl that's this wide. That way, in the center of the arrangement, I can have things floating straight up because they'll put right into the frog. And then I can also have the chicken wire kind of letting things hang open and make a beautiful shape around the edges. So I'm going to take this in. All right. So I'm going to attempt to make this arrangement without any branches. It's spring, and so I'd like to have some, but I couldn't get any quite yet. But I have this amazing jasmine vine, which I'm going to put in the very beginning here. Sometimes around this time of the year, you can get white jasmine vine, which is really amazing and smells heavenly. So putting these around the edges. I always start around the edges of my container. Sometimes I work in groups. Maybe I'll put 3 or 4 clusters all around the edge. That's kind of to keep it balanced. If this was for a round table, you definitely want to make sure you're putting these long drapey pieces around all of the edges so that it's doesn't have one face or one main side. I'm working on the Lazy Susan, which is the easiest way, I think, to make a centerpiece. You can rotate it constantly so you don't get stuck on any one spot. Jasmine vine was one of the very first vines that I started working with when I did flowers because it's pretty easy to get. It's available a lot of places, and you can get it almost year-round. Not always with the blooms on it, but it was one of the first ones I knew about, and I still love it.
Hey, Sarah, we're getting a couple questions around frogs. Are you currently using a frog in this arrangement, or is it just chicken wire?
Yes, I've got a frog in there. That's kind of what will help me make my flowers stand up more vertical if I want them to, and then the chicken wire on it as well. So I like to start with all one material and then move into my next one. And then I might go back in towards the end and add in some more jasmine vine once I see if it needs it somewhere. But I've just kind of let it do its drapey, flowy thing and put it all around. And next I'll start in with some other flowers. Some of these are light, and I might end up propping them up on something else towards the end. So like have them come up a little bit higher. We'll see when we get there. I think next I'll go into these sweet pea. These are Japanese, so they were a little bit more expensive than they would have been if I had bought them locally. But you probably can't see the color too well, but I'll post a photo of them later. They're incredible. I think they're dyed, which, I mean, I guess I'm into it. I don't really know the best way. They're like this amazing peachy color, but you can see all the veins of the flower. And they're kind of like fleshy looking. It's really incredible. So it's got a few colors going on in it. I'm using these first. Usually I do start with a branch of some kind. Like I mentioned, I wish I had some blooming branches, but I don't. So I usually let something that's tall create the shape of my arrangement. Since the sweet pea is the tallest thing I'll be using here, I'm going to put it in first and kind of let it dominate the shape. And sweet pea are one of those flowers that are so beautiful isolated. Sometimes the branches of those bigger things you're working with aren't so beautiful isolated. They're really stiff or straight. And I do show an example of that actually in the winter course. The arrangement, I mean, in the winter, there's pine and eucalyptus is nice and soft. There aren't too many things available that have like a really nice organic shape. So I always struggle with like really straight sticks in the winter. But I show an example there of how you can soften them and give them a little bit more shape. Sweet pea do have really straight stems, but they've got all the blooms going down. So it doesn't really bother me when they're straight because they have all this softness and all this shape with each of the individual blooms.
And remember, guys, we will post a picture of the finished arrangement on Sarah's Instagram as well as Once Wed's Instagram later today with the flowers used, because we know sometimes it's hard to get all those beautiful nuances and details that we love about Sarah's centerpieces on a webinar.
So most of these are sticking to the frog, just so I know that they're going to stand straight up the direction that I want. You might be intimidated by frogs because you've tried to use one in a clear glass vase, and I don't blame you. That's really hard to do. It just takes a lot of time and patience. You have to make sure that every stem that you're putting in goes on the frog. That's why it's great when you're not using a clear container to use a frog with chicken wire. Because you have the stability of both the frog and the chicken wire. I need the frog, I think, for something as light as the sweet pea with something with this small of a stem so that I can pinpoint where exactly it's going to go. With chicken wire, they'd be moving around a little bit more, which is fine. I love just chicken wire, but I think it's useful. So I'm still plugging in sweet pea. I'm going wild with these.
So we're getting a lot of questions about the vessel you're using.
Yes, this is like a faux terracotta. I think it's ceramic. Well, maybe it is terracotta actually because it does absorb a lot of water, which is one reason that I made sure to put my frog in before I put the water in, so that my frog was really tight to the bottom of the container. This is from, let me think. I can't remember the name of the company. But this is, like, you can definitely buy these from Accent Decor. I think Jamali Garden has them. Home Art. They come in, like, a white or white with kind of green moss look on them. Or this is, like, the darker gray. All right, so I've got my sweet pea in. The sweet pea again is going to be kind of like the high point of this arrangement. I mean, these, I'm just going to call them fire because they look like fire to me. And I think that's kind of how they'll be best appreciated, is just letting them be fire. You know, they're floating, they're in kind of their little flames going upwards. That's what they do best. So that's what I'm going to let them do and kind of be dominant in this arrangement doing that. Next, I'm going to go through and start plugging in these ranunculus. These are those amazing, like, lavender ranunculus. These are Italian, so again, a little bit more expensive, but I couldn't help myself. And that's one thing that you'll see in the course is me making arrangements when I was somewhere buying flowers at a market and how cheap that can be. And then you'll also see when I had to pay for shipping and how that made a big difference in the cost of the arrangement. So it's something to take into consideration for those of you who are shipping things. Like I most of the time do have to ship things because where I live, we don't have a market. We have some wholesalers, but I can't usually get all the things I want from them locally. Plugging in this ranunculus, I'm going to rotate it around to you here in a second. And this color palette kind of came together I had a bunch of leftovers on hand from doing a few things. And then I picked up a couple things and cut some from my garden too to connect the color palette. I always say it, but like those really muddy tones, I think that's kind of one of my things. Muddy, I mean, what is muddy? It's like when something has a little bit more brown in it, I'd say, than normal. It's not like, these aren't just peach. They kind of have, they're like a little darker, like not quite as bright as a regular peach. So they're kind of like color to me. This isn't like a lavender like a lilac is. It kind of has these brown tips on it. That's one of the things I love about spring. The earth is like kind of wet and it is still brown. It's not really at its brightest yet. So I like to mimic that in my spring arrangements. Maybe I'm using really bright flowers, but I bring in a lot of those brown tones as well because that feels to me like the earth feels at the time. It's kind of appropriate.
Well, and in the Coursera, I feel like it's not just you listing out flowers by season of like, here's my list of my 10 favorite flowers. It's really you know, all these little wonderful tidbits that Sarah's sharing about each of the flowers, the sweet peas, the ranunculuses, the colors, the varieties, how they're paired well together. I think that was one of like the most magical parts about the season course of how it kind of ended up happening and came to be, was that Sarah shares all of these wonderful moments and like tidbits about each of these flowers and how she uses them and what's her favorite color palette to pair them, you know, her favorite other flowers to pair them with. It's so much more than just listing out, well, here are my top 10 favorite flowers in spring.
Yeah. So in spring, like I said, I like to go kind of muddy and brown with things because we don't want to, I don't know, we don't want it to look like Easter. Like maybe the earth does get that bright at some point, but to me, it's like much more sophisticated. It's a little bit more muddy. One of my like tricks in the winter is we've been calling it acid green. It's like this acid lime green, really bright yellow color. And that to me like livens up any color palette. You could use it any season, but I think you especially need that in the winter when it seems like a lot of the time the color palettes you're working with are like whites, you know, whites with accents of black or like deep burgundies. You need something to like make it a little bit more exciting. So my trick for winter is that acid green yellow color. And you'll see me use that actually a couple times.
And then Sarah, when we were prepping for this webinar, some people are having questions about the ranunculuses. How do you keep them so sturdy? Were those the flowers that you were wiring?
Yes. So I haven't really used any of them. No, I have used one that I wired. I will show you when I get to it. Some of these are like everyone's favorite ranunculus right now. These ones that are like brownish red on the backside and kind of yellow on the face. They're beautiful and they have these amazing curvy stems. I posted one of those. But it's not always realistic, I guess, to put that in arrangement and send it to an event or give it to a client. Maybe it looks amazing, curved, but you don't want it to just snap off. So I do wire these sometimes. You can wire a ranunculus actually straight up the center of the stem. It takes so long and it is not you just like, they're hollow actually in the bottom of the stem. So you just have to go very slowly up the center and like bend the stem if you need to like make your wire path up there. Or if you're open to it, you can just wire the traditional way where you put the wire underneath the head of the ranunculus, just like here, and then you just twist it around. And those you can see it. So if I were doing this for like a bouquet, I wouldn't wire it that way. I think for a centerpiece, that's fine. And then you have a lot of options. You can kind of bend the head to face the way you want to. I don't usually try and make them straight. You can see like, when I get to it, I'll show you some of the ones that I'm using that are wired. I used a really thin gauge wire. So they're still having their beautiful curved shape that I love and really want to place, but I'm not worried about them actually like falling off. So I've plugged in this lavender colored ranunculus in groups. I think groupings are really important to give you impact. We could put them all over, but I think I'm always mimicking nature a little bit in the way that like on a rose bush, there are several heads of a rose kind of coming out of you and leaning away from the bush. And you kind of want to mimic that abundance. So got them in clusters all around here, and I'm staggering them, at different heights. They're not all on the same plane. So otherwise you'd be making a round arrangement. We're staggering them kind of like they're growing out of here.
Sarah, I remember you mentioning when we were in the last few weeks as we were kind of finishing up the course, how this is your favorite time of year to do flowers. Can you share a little bit about like why that is?
Yeah. I think like in the literal sense, winter is very long and can get kind of rough sometimes, especially where I live. It's gray and cold. The mountains are beautiful, but they're far away and everything's covered in ice. So it's kind of just like a relief when spring comes. It's also very suspenseful. You know, you're waiting and it's slow. Like first you'll see the tree buds and then you'll see the bulbs come up. And then all of a sudden it's like exploding with all of the blooming trees and branches. So it's, I don't know, it's like very emotional for me. And also it's like amazing to me that the earth produces everything it does. And I think it's so incredible to see like my garden go from just like mud and sticks to 3 weeks later being full of flowers. And I'm constantly amazed that like with sunlight and water that flowers can grow and do what they do. So that is a huge part of it. But I also, like I said, just really love the shapes of the flowers and the colors that are available in the spring. It feels so appropriate to use like these muddy tones in early spring, and then later spring use those really bright tones when we're like celebrating, you know, that the earth is here.
Yeah. Sarah, getting a lot of questions around like placements of blooms, like what you're thinking about as you're kind of putting together. You mentioned you like to kind of cluster and this, to kind of mimic or, you know, what happens in nature, how flora, you know, I know that's such a big influence in your work, but what's going through your mind as you're putting together like where to choose where the blooms go?
Yeah. Right now I'm clustering ranunculus. Those are kind of my big blooms. And then I'm also really subtly looking at color. Even within these ranunculus, there are some that have like more of a beige color and some that have more of a purple color. And I'm making like little miniature color palettes throughout my whole arrangement. So I have like my master color palette, which is everything you're seeing, but then I like to make little moments in the arrangement that are like focused on one of those. I have, this is called I believe a Lux ranunculus. This is from Japan. And then I also have these ones, the yellow ones, and I love them together. But when I was looking at them next to in the arrangement, I kind of feel like we don't need them both. We only need one of them, but I want to use each of them. So what I do a lot of times in my arrangements is like, maybe I'll use these ones in one section of the arrangement, and then I'll use these ones in another. So while it's like this cohesive color palette as a group, I'm also creating smaller moments that each kind of have their own taste. And that's something that you may not be able to see right now, but you'll see when I post photos. Also in the course, which is something that's amazing, is we set up a camera right behind me looking into the vase. So you see me from the front, and then you also have a view of me you can see my hands putting the flowers into the vase. So you can see both of those angles, and I think kind of get a better understanding of how I built those miniature color palettes within the arrangement.
Yeah. I feel like this course is so much more than just place a flower here, place a flower here. I think there are resources out there and courses out there that show the mechanics of floral design. But Sarah, I mean, as you guys have kind of seen, we really have tried to go into so much more detail about what florists really want to know. You know, pricing mechanics, but also, you know, Sarah's creative process and how she thinks about color in context of the seasons. It really is neat to see how it kind of came together. And it does really, I feel like it really hits on all the things that florists want to know in a floral course.
And that's one thing too. The last course was really excellent, and then in the reviews, people said they wanted even more. And we're seeing a lot of the same people buying this course as well because they just want more. But we are giving you all of that on like a whole other level with the breakdowns of the cost. And with the installations course, you actually see my boards that I made of the installations that I was planning to make for the course. So I made boards at home, and then when we went to film, I executed them. So you can see kind of what my vision was before, and then see what I made out of that when we were actually working.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sarah. I forgot about how that's a big part of the course. I mean, a lot of times from just, getting to know you over the last few years, you'll go into an event or a wedding with kind of an overall idea of what you want, but then you show up to the market the day of or a couple of days before and you kind of have to troubleshoot and change it. And also just walking into the venue, maybe what you originally, how you wanted to rig it, the installation or the structure of it, you're having to change it. And we actually show that in the course. Sarah walking into the venue where we ended up filming the course and her kind of thinking through, okay, well, I originally thought this, but now I'm going to do this. I think it's neat that she shares those troubleshooting ideas, because I think that that's something that you still encounter even doing the events you do nowadays.
Yeah, it's very true. And maybe you're not, encountering problems with your structure because hopefully all those things are figured out, but maybe you don't like the way your flowers look together and you want to add in a different foliage and change the look. I mean, so much of it is about being flexible and just really using your materials for what their strengths are and not trying to force them to do something else. If you're kind of just open to working with things and showcasing their best features rather than like trying to make them do what you want them to, I think your product and your results will always be better. So that's something I try and remind myself to do and be flexible with, especially on those bigger installations.
Sarah asked a question around how far in advance you would make this arrangement, let's say for a wedding. Like, what is your kind of construction time leading up to the event in terms of, designs?
Yeah, I would usually make this the day before the event. Sometimes I know some of you who maybe shop the market and have everything available to you earlier would make this 2 days before the event, and I think that's great if you can. But for me, it's usually the day before the event.
Yeah.
And that's something that we go through, like the case studies of my whole event production in our first courses that we launched too.
Also getting a lot of questions around vessels. Do you pick up the vessels yourselves or do you expect the customers to return them? Some people have questions around like, do your client, do the guests get to take them home? Do the clients get to take them home? Do you have a breakdown team that takes care of all that?
Yeah, I usually come get everything. I do break down almost all of my own events, just because I like to be there and I like to see it through to the end. Even though I'm exhausted and whatever, I think I sort of just feel responsible. I need to be there to the very end. I do have, of course, people coming with me, or sometimes a separate breakdown team. Most of the time, my clients or the guests don't take arrangements home at this point. I think earlier on in my career, a lot of people did. Or sometimes I would go, while people are dancing and like slowly pull the centerpieces from the tables and wrap them in brown paper and tie them with string and give them to people. And I would just charge for my time on that. But then I found most of the time people weren't taking them or they weren't putting them in water probably. So then by the time they got home, they didn't look good and I didn't want them to remember the flowers that way. So I kind of try to avoid that now. Most of the time I do go break down. I usually give the client a few arrangements to take home with them if they want to, or, if we're working at a hotel that they're staying at, I'll have them take a few to their room. But then we're just taking the rest. And I usually keep my containers. If they want to take them home, I would just pitch kind of a more inexpensive container or charge them to go and take them out of the expensive container and put it into something cheaper. So let's see, this is getting pretty wild. I'm going in on, I just added in some hellebore and fritillaria over here. And you can just see that I'm staggering everything. Nothing is like leaning on each other or like on the same plane. We don't have two heads like right next to each other. They're always kind of like this. That way you can see them and appreciate each one of them. I've used more of the yellow colors on this side of the arrangement, and I've got more of like the lavender tones on the side that you can kind of see. So that's what I was talking about. There's like sort of two different color palettes or moments of focused color palettes within the arrangement. It's not the same all the way around.
And Sarah, the small purple flower that you just put up, is that Frida? Am I saying it right?
Fritillaria.
Fritillaria.
These guys, we all probably just call them, I call them little dancers. They have such amazing shape. They've got these, oh, this one has two heads. They have these little green arms that I love. I never am quite sure how many of these I want to take off. I usually take off like half of them, and then I put them in with some of them on, and then we'll usually pick a few off towards the end. Sometimes they start to feel a little bit messy if you have too many of those. I'm actually going to move some of this around. I think some people get intimidated by flowers because they feel like it's something that's really final that they're doing. Like they're intimidated to make an arrangement because they're afraid they're going to mess it up. But I think that's silly. It's not, like nothing is final with flowers. You can move them around constantly. And I still will like make a bouquet and then come back to it a half an hour later and rework some things sometimes. It's easy to just go into an arrangement and pull something out and try again. So don't get intimidated by that. If you're newer at this, you know, it's okay. And that's one of the advantages in working with chicken wire or a frog rather than foam. Once you put something in foam, it's kind of stuck there, or then you have a hole in your foam if you take it out. But with chicken wire or frog, you can just move things around as much as you need to. So I think I'll make a darker spot in this arrangement. I've got these like more fuchsia colored ranunculus, but I don't really want them, I don't want that much contrast in the arrangement. So I'm going to keep these down kind of low. That's what I do sometimes with a flower like that. I want the kind of glow of this bright fuchsia ranunculus in my arrangement, but I don't really want it to be a prominent color. So I'm going to bury it down a little bit low. It's not squished. You'll still be able to see it. It still has its space, but it's not going to become one of the prominent flowers that's floating around in here. You can use like the flowers that you don't like as much down there too. Like I use a lot of standard roses in kind of that bottom layer underneath things. Like if I love the color, but I'm not crazy about the shape of the rose or even a carnation, just bury it right down in the very bottom and let its color be seen. But not its shape.
Megan says, so gorgeous, Sarah. This looks like a painting. Love the golden yellow with the lavender.
Yeah. Thank you. It's fun. It's very colorful.
And someone mentioned you're not using a lot of greenery and foliage in this arrangement. It's a lot more color and flowers.
Yeah. You know, in the spring, there aren't that many leaves available, actually. Like, not too much with the leaf is growing on it. The jasmine vine in here is technically a greenery, but it's not very leafy. I don't really use too many greens in the spring, to be honest with you. Spirea is something that I do use a lot. That's really amazing. But I don't like to use anything with a big leaf because then it kind of becomes overpowering to the tiny, like really delicate blooms that spring has. And that's something I really want you to be able to appreciate is like how delicate they are.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of questions come in around what Sarah would charge for this arrangement, and she is actually going to share that. We're going to do it in the Q&A at the very end once Sarah is done with the kind of live design portion of the webinar.
So I've got some fritillaria next to this ranunculus right here. I have some ranunculus that's really crazy. They're like white with purple tips. They're kind of like the Picotee ones, but these ones are Japanese, so they're like, I mean, it almost looks like tissue paper or confetti. I love the way they look next to the checkered fritillaria. And that's kind of how I approach my color palettes, putting these like things together and then blending them with kind of the next little micro color palette that I'm making within my arrangement. So throughout this zone that's facing me, I have kind of my like lavenders and purples, and then it fades and it's a little bit more red here. Then it's darker in there, but you might not be able to tell too well. It gets gold on this side.
Yeah. It's looking so lush.
Yeah, there are a lot of flowers in here. I'm actually didn't plan on using them all. They're a lot more expensive than I thought.
You're just excited that spring's coming. Although I know it's still like snowing in Utah, but we're starting to see little like glimmers of it here in the South, flowers blooming, things and trees as well.
So exciting. Yeah, it's actually really amazing here today. It's like going to be 70 degrees. I know it's in Manhattan, so I'm sorry for you. But, you know, spring flowers are still in season, so you can at least get those still and let them make you happy. That's one of the amazing things about spring, actually. You can make a spring arrangement in January. With the way the flower market works, they're available really early in the year. And they stick around pretty late, too. And I know if you're in the southern hemisphere, sometimes you can get spring flowers all year long because you have kind of that temperate climate. And then you're very lucky. And you have a garden where you can take advantage of those things and grow them. So.
Yeah, Kristen said everything's blooming already in Memphis.
So you might not be able to tell too much, but this came from that same bunch of sweet pea that I have. Actually, you can tell between these two. This one's just a little bit more faded and more of like a parchment color. So I'm going to cluster that next to the golds in my arrangement because I think it complements that color really well. And kind of, I don't know, it brings out that's kind of the gold section of my arrangement.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of finishing up here, filling in some holes. This is really fun. I started high, and I'm kind of working down low. Sometimes if you're using like a garden rose or a peony, you might start down low from your base and then build out. And it kind of just depends on the materials you're using. I wanted to start with my sweet pea here, so I started high, and now I'm actually building my layers back down low. And I'm kind of building steps. Like, you never want, well, maybe you do, but if you don't want one flower really isolated standing by itself, then you kind of build steps up to it with your other flowers, or work upwards and build steps down, kind of like halfway from one head of the flower down to the next. This is that ranunculus that I posted on my Instagram. You can see it's really curvy. This is actually wired, but I didn't use a thick wire that would make it straight because I really like the way it bounces and I like the way it hangs out. So I'm going to use it on the edge of a container. With every flower you use, every branch, every big flower, every small flower, it's important to look at it and then kind of see what its best features are. This one, I think it's got a beautiful face, but it's an amazing flower to put on the edge of a vase. Look at that shape. So I'm going to really embrace the shape that it's got and let it hang over the edge of the vase. And then again, if you have something you're using that doesn't have a nice shape, it's a really straight, quicksand rose or something like that, maybe you use that kind of in the lower layer of your arrangement, or stagger a few of them and cluster them together so that as a group, they don't look as straight because you've layered them.
It's really pretty.
That's hanging around right there. All right. So I'm just about done here. I haven't done an official stem count to see what I did use in here. But I know the cost of the flowers that I had to begin with. And I think I would charge about $4.50 for this, which is kind of a lot for a centerpiece. But I think, as you know, I used some flowers that were imported, and those are a little bit more expensive, something to take into consideration. That's like one of those ways you might accidentally go over budget if you decide to buy the Japanese sweet peas instead of the Californian ones. So you have to be careful with all that. But think that's about where we end up here. And I will share with you my pricing structure in the course. On each one of those case studies, we break down what went into it and how much they cost. You'll actually see my cost on like that bunch of ranunculus that went to the arrangement, and then I'll share with you my final cost. And maybe or my final price. Maybe it follows my normal structure, or maybe it's one of those exceptions, like I said, where I'm charging for impact. And then there's some of them too where I said, like, oh, I actually spent more than I wanted to. I don't know that I could get away with charging that, or maybe I, didn't allow enough budget for this. So you'll see those in there too. It's very realistic.
I'm going to go ahead and put up the offer on the right-hand side of the webinar for you guys to be able to click through and learn more about the course. Sarah's going to answer more questions that have been coming through the webinar. There's lots of questions on setting up for events and pricing and things like that. But here's the offer. If you guys click through to learn more, it'll open up a new tab so you still can have Sarah's webinar open as well. Just a quick reminder, we are hosting a special sale right now where you can get up to $300 off until Thursday at midnight. And we do have payment plans available, so you can split up the payments over the upcoming months. So yeah, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. You guys can keep asking questions in the chat for Sarah, and we're going to try to get to as many as we possibly can. So yeah, Sarah, the arrangement turned out beautiful. I noticed that you had some of the kind of more woodsy, kind of wiry looking branches in the front. Are you planning to use those, or do you feel like they're not necessary now looking at the finished piece?
I do. Sorry, it's kind of a mess up there.
No, that's okay.
This is something that I think I might add in a little bit towards the end. I love these. These are like just some dead vines I cut from my garden. This is like one of those ways to just embrace what's available to you. Maybe nothing's around and you have dead twigs, but they can be so beautiful mixed with a few things. I actually made these same ones. I pulled them out of arrangement and posted a couple days ago that had hellebore and sweet pea in it. So this is definitely something that I would use in like a winter, well, any season really, winter, spring, fall arrangement. It's kind of a way to, like, this arrangement is so beautiful and feminine. Sometimes I wanted them to be a little bit more grounded, like maybe a little bit more earthy. So that's kind of one of my favorite things to do is put like some twigs or some dead vines, maybe I should say dried vines, not dead vines. Put them in there. This is something I could have started my arrangement with that, like my branches, and worked off of that and made this more light. But I think I'll plug a few of those in, maybe just as accents, maybe in like the more golden area of the arrangement.
So I'm seeing a couple questions come through about which course is right for you. And then also a lot of questions specific to kind of how Sarah got started in floral, becoming a floral designer, as well as how she's been able to build her brand to kind of target more luxury, higher end weddings. And so I kind of going to give you guys a design course and a business course, and you can buy both together as a combo, or you can buy them separately. The design course includes a centerpiece arrangement video, installation video, bouquet, how did she grow her business? How does she kind of structure her events? What are her timelines? So that's a really great course if you're wanting to get. There you are. She came back. And then, so I'm going to go back to full screen, Sarah, so you guys can see the beautiful arrangement. Yeah, guys, if you're seeing it frozen, she'll come back. She just popped off for a bit, but she's back. Yeah, and so I see a lot of questions around like transporting. All of those things are covered in the business course, the professional course, and the nature of wedding floral design. Sarah's newest courses, the ones we're releasing this week. Oops. Okay, guys, it says that it got frozen, so you couldn't hear me. So I'm going to say that one more time. The two courses we released last year with Sarah are the Nature of Wedding Floral Design, the design course, and the business course. The design course covers centerpieces, installations, bouquets, and large-scale arrangements. There are case studies that go with each of those types of floral arrangements, as well as videos. There's over 4 hours of video with the first course that Sarah did. So that kind of goes into Sarah's creative process, kind of how she views like all of her designs. The business part of the Nature of Wedding Floral Design goes deep on everything business with Sarah. So how she got started, marketing, how she started working with all these larger event planners, how she structures her events, timelines, how does her proposal writing process work. So Sarah does visual proposals as well as written proposals. One of the things that we feedback based on the first course Sarah did is with the Best of Sarah Windward, the newest courses that we're releasing this week is that we've gone much deeper into recipe writing. So the different flowers, greenery, foliage that Sarah is using, as well as the supplies. There's almost twice the amount of video training. So way more video. You guys love the videos from the first course. You wanted more. And then we also go into retail and wholesale pricing because that was something else that you guys wanted to learn more from Sarah about. So we have people that have bought both of Sarah's first courses as well as they've purchased the second courses. And when we were testing the course, something that was really important to us was that we wanted to make sure that there was very little crossover content. So if you had purchased Sarah's first course before, we wanted it to feel like if you bought the Best of Sarah Windward, there was still all of this new content you were learning. And every single tester that we brought on, that was the feedback that they gave to us, is that they felt like they learned so much and that there wasn't a lot of crossover between the two courses. So if you've purchased her course before and you're worried that maybe this course is really similar to that, I can 100% guarantee you that that's not the case. And even I read both Sarah's first course and this second course, and that was honestly a big concern for me. Is like, okay, how much of this is going to be crossover? And the reality is that so very little of it is. And I walked away even more enchanted with not only Sarah as a person, but how she approaches floral design after working with her during these courses. I mean, that week that we spent together, I'm telling you, it was just absolutely magical. And the videos, I mean, they're my favorite that we've done yet. It really is such a wonderful course. And Sarah is just such a joy to not only work with, but to learn from. And I feel like every time that I watch her design, I walk away learning something new. And I'm not even a floral designer, and I don't even want to do flowers until I work with Sarah and I'm like, okay, I need to start a garden. I want to become a floral designer. So yeah, I mean, Heather and Sarah's magic. It's really true.
And I think one thing that's incredibly embarrassing for me, but really good for you, is how realistic the videos are. You're seeing everything. Like, you're seeing me say, like, you know what, I actually don't like that, and take it out. Or, never mind, let's take that down and try it again. So you're seeing the entire process. It's not just like, okay, and then it cuts and we're finished. You get to see and hear all the conversations that I have with my assistants about the way things look or how we need to switch things up. So it's, yeah.
Another question we're getting is, how does this relate to like bows and arrows flowers and their floral course? And that's always another concern for us, is what's the crossover between floral design courses with different experts. And a big mission that we have here at If I Made is that we truly believe you can learn so much from different types of creatives. Everyone has a different process, not only a creative process, but how they run their business. And the way that Sarah runs her business and prices her arrangements and puts together her arrangements and designs and sees the world is very different than the way that Bows and Arrows does. They're coming more from a fine art background. That definitely fuels and motivates how they see and design. And Sarah obviously is coming at it from a different, angle. She didn't go to art school. She's coming at it from, nature is definitely a big influence in her work. So if you've taken Bows and Arrows course before and never purchased a Sarah Windward course, I can also confidently say that two courses are very different. And the best news of all is that we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So there's really no risk on your end for purchasing the course. We really want every single person that buys a course to walk away feeling like they've learned something, they're better off, they know, they have tangible, practical things that they can apply in their business and in their craft.
I think one of the things too, as Emily said, I really come at this from a nature or kind of an emotional perspective. which is different than so many florists. I think there's like a couple types of us in this industry. Some of us are like more feely, and then some of us are more like, this is recipes and this is structure, and both of them work, and you can actually create like a similar product with either of them. But one thing that I really challenged myself to do when making the course was to be able to tell those of you who need more of the structure or who need the recipe or kind of like the formulas what mine are. And I never go, I didn't initially go into anything with recipes, but then I've learned afterwards to go back through, and I found that I do have these same patterns or these same formulas that end up in each of my arrangements. And while I don't go in thinking about them that way, they do exist. And so we've really figured out how to articulate what those are for you in the course, which is something that's been like a process for me that I think is really cool.
Sarah, we got a lot of questions around how would you transport an arrangement like this? Like, what does it look like when you're getting ready for an event? Is that on site? Are you bringing it on site? Does it differ depending on the event?
Yeah, I don't usually work on site unless I'm doing something really big, like a big urn arrangement or an installation. This is something I would definitely do and then transport to the venue. I wrap newspaper or roll up paper from flower boxes and kind of put it underneath, like all around this area, and it would kind of hold these flowers up, and then we just slide them into boxes. We make flower boxes. We just make sure there's enough paper around all of these so that this part, the front part of the arrangement, isn't getting smashed into the next one. It's terrifying. I hate packing.
But you're so good at it. That was one of the things I learned about Sarah when we were filming. She is a master packer. What she was able to put in her van was astonishing. I was like, there's no way all of this is going to go home with Sarah. And sure enough, every single nook and cranny was being used. It was amazing.
It's like an essential part of the job. But I'm like, I really hate packing, and sometimes I just pass that off onto like a couple members of my team that are good at it, because I know it gets me really flustered, and I try and kind of preserve myself. But I also like won't let people touch an arrangement sometimes. Like, and I think that's another thing with filming. People are like, "Oh, I'll move it," but I'm like, "Wait, there's a way to carry everything. There's a way to pack everything." And some of that just depends on the way you like to do it. But I do actually share all of that in the nature of floral design. I talk about the case studies where I worked an hour away from the venue. It took 4 of us a half an hour to pack up, and then it took 4 of us an hour to touch up when we got there. I kind of go through all of that. And that's a huge part of the job. It's not all just pretty flower arrangements, like standing at the flower counter making these arrangements. There's a lot more that goes into it. So I share all of that with you in that course as well.
This is something that I know you go a lot more into kind of like your visual proposal writing process in the professionals course in the first one that you did. But what's your what's your process when working with a client on an event? Like how, some people in the chat, people were saying it's so hard to plan so far in advance. I mean, when are you usually doing, because the events you're doing now are you do some small, more intimate events, but they're much on a larger scale, and you're working with planners. How far out do you want to be working with your clients on the actual, concept of like what the installation is going to be? Because I know you're very purposeful in not showing finished designs as well. You really want to give yourself the freedom the week of to make changes if you need to.
Right. It's such a trick. Like, and it depends on each client. Sometimes your client might want to see exactly what's going into it and know the measurements of their final arch, and what percentage roses and what percentage greenery. And sometimes they're like, make me a pretty arch that feels like this. And I deal with both of those types of clients. I usually come up with the main concept when we're initially working together. Sometimes that's 9 months to a year out. Sometimes that's 2 months ahead of time. It just depends on when we book. But I do give examples of my proposals, and I show you that I try to avoid showing like photos of just finished floral arches with other couples standing underneath them on a proposal, because that doesn't really give me any room to be creative, I think that makes the client kind of expect that. And then, what if yours ends up not looking as full as that one or something? Are you letting them down? So I try and make these proposals, like choose photos that are like maybe close-ups of the flowers or a little bit more abstract. Or, sometimes it needs to have a photo of a finished arch in it, and that's fine too. But I usually make the plans for what materials I'll use pretty far ahead of time and get estimates from my wholesalers or my branch supplier or whatever. How much does this usually cost in September? Maybe I'm asking in January, but how much does this usually cost in September? And then I check in with them again in July. Like, does it look like these are going to be in season? Do you think they'll still cost this much? And then maybe a week before the event in the September, they go out of season and you have to choose something else. That happens. But usually I'm planning kind of like maybe a plan A and plan B pretty far in advance, so I know how to price things.
One of the questions that I'm also seeing is around, well, I'm at a place in my business where I'm not working on these more luxury, higher end events. How is this course going to apply to me? And we were really purposeful when we were putting together this course to make sure that there was a lot of variety in the case studies that we were showing. So everything from centerpieces that Sarah has done for some of these larger budget weddings to some that she did in the beginning, as well as some more brand new content that you haven't seen yet that's still very budget friendly. Because we know that florists buying this course are at all different types of levels in terms of what their budgets are, and we really tried to make it show as much variety as possible when it comes to different price points and budgets that you guys could be working with depending on where you're located in the States or outside of the States. But yeah, so Sarah's actually going to show a finished image of this on her Instagram, and we're going to do the same later on Once Wed. And feel free to stay in the chat if you guys have any questions about the course. I've got Tanae and Tiffany on the other end. They're helping us out. And then, yeah, feel free to reach out to us at info@ifimade if you have any questions. Also, if you're on the fence about buying the course, I would suggest looking up the If I Made hashtag If I Made. I'll write it in the chat. We already have people who have bought the course that are diving into it, and they're giving feedback about it. And it's just really it's very fulfilling for me to see something that we've all worked so hard on the last few months, that people are already diving into the content and they're just so excited about it and they're learning so much. So if you're on the fence, definitely take a look at the Instagram, hashtag If I Made, and you can kind of read some of the testimonials that are coming through about this course as well as Sarah's first course. Sarah, thank you again for joining us, and thanks everyone for joining us from all over the world. It was so wonderful to see everyone again. Okay, bye guys.